Welcome back to Extra Literary Affairs, a podcast for the lit curious reader, because why not read a little of everything? I'm Joey Kelly.
And I'm Jennifer Smith.
And today we are continuing our celebration of Black authors, poets, and writers by discussing selected poems from a collection titled Felon by Reginald Dwyane Betts.
Yes, Joey. Thank you so much for bringing this collection to my attention. This is a author and poet that is new to me, so I am very happy to read a little bit about his background and share what I learned. Reginald Dwyane Betts is a poet and a lawyer. He currently serves as the executive director of Freedom Reads, a nonprofit organization radically transforming access to literature in prisons through the installation of freedom libraries across the country. Sounds exactly like our kind of guy. He is a 2021 MacArthur Fellow and a Yale Law School graduate. He has been awarded fellowships from Harvard's Radcliffe Institute, the Guggenheim Foundation, New America, and the Aspen Institute. Betts is the author of a memoir and 3 collections of poetry, including the one that we are talking about today. He has transformed his American Book Award-winning collection into a solo theater show. So he has a very well-rounded career. Reginald Dwyane Betts is also a formerly incarcerated person, a title he earned after his release from prison more than 20 years ago. He entered the prison system at the age of 16 and emerged 8 years later as a published poet with a paralegal certificate. What happened in those years and the decades that followed forms the extraordinary subject of Felons, this collection of poems that confronts what Betts calls, and I quote, the funk of post-incarceration existence with unflinching honesty and stunning artistry. Felon poems, I love that it's felon : poems, represents the culmination of Betts' life's work, bearing witness to a system that seeks to reduce people to their worst moments while insisting through the transformative power of art and language that redemption, both personally and societally, remains possible.
He's a new poet to me as well. I just happened to come across his poetry collection, and I have read this entire collection, and I'm going to give you what's the synopsis, which feels like a weird way to say for a poetry collection, but there is a central theme that he's talking about here. One of his other poetry collections I've started reading and is also good, so I suggest reading him. So from the back of this collection, it says, Felon tells a story of the effects of incarceration in fierce, dazzling poems, canvassing a wide range of emotions and experiences through homelessness, underemployment, love, drug abuse, domestic violence, fatherhood, and grace. And in doing so, creates a travelogue for an imagined life. Reginald Dwyane Betts confronts the funk of post-incarceration existence and examines prison not as a static space, but as a force that enacts pressure throughout a person's life. The poems move between traditional and newfound forms with power and agility, from revolutionary found poems created by redacting court documents to the astonishing crown of sonnets that serves as the volume's radiant conclusion. Drawing inspiration from lawsuits filed on behalf of the incarcerated, the redaction poems focus on the ways we exploit and erase the poor and imprisoned from public consciousness. Traditionally, redaction erases what is top secret. In Felon, Betts redacts what is superfluous, bringing into focus the profound failures of the criminal justice system and the inadequacy of the label it generates. Challenging the complexities of language, Betts animates what it means to be a felon.
Joey, thank you for giving us that information that was directly taken from the back of the collection. So we received that from a very good source. And I know that you have read through the collection. I have only read 4 of the poems that we selected together to discuss today. The 4 poems are in Alabama, in Houston, in California, and in Missouri. However, instead of analyzing each and every poem, I think it would be great, Joey, if we talked about what stood out to us overall in the way in which the poems were written and our experience reading them. But before we dive into that aspect of the poetry experience, let's just review quickly what redaction is and how it is generally used. As we mentioned in the intro, redaction is usually a legal term. It refers to the process of editing or censoring a document to remove sensitive, classified, or confidential information before public use. You've probably seen that in government documents. You're hearing a lot about it on the news right now. There's a lot of redaction going on. and it's usually a document that has black bars covering certain passages. Generally, this is the goal to protect privacy, national security, or proprietary intellectual property while still allowing the gist of the document to be read. In a creative sense, redaction has become a really fun and exciting artistic technique. Here, a writer takes existing text, like a newspaper article, a page from a book, a legal document, another person's work, and they selectively block out or remove some of the words, leaving behind what will turn into poetry or a very different storyline of text. This is also sometimes called blackout poetry or erasure poetry. In this case, the poet acts like a sculptor. They just chisel away at the source material to reveal a hidden poem within that may have a very different context than the document it actually came from. For example, you might take a page from an old textbook, start blacking out, crossing out random words that seem to not work for you with a Sharpie. And then the remaining visible words create a poem about loneliness or nature or the futility of work, whatever it is, even though the original text was about biology or history or economics. So it's just a very interesting way to do that. This creative constraint yields surprisingly powerful results. And in the case of this particular poetry collection, which he was inspired to do, this blackout erasure poetry, it transformed these bureaucratic and very difficult legal texts into these lyrical works. So, Joey, do you want to show us an example of a redacted poem that you put together?
I sure did do that, and I did it only because I didn't wanna show Bet's actual poetry. I didn't wanna just be like, "Here's this guy's work, and I'm gonna share it for free." That felt wrong. I started out thinking, "I'm just gonna do it just to show an example of what this could look like," and then I actually spent more time than I thought, because I was like, "How would I actually do this?" I just Googled a random document. It's from the Northern District of California. It was kind of difficult. I mean, I'm not trying to say this was easy. It's certainly not, and I don't think I compare anything to Betts and his poetry. That's not what I'm trying to say. But it was difficult to read this document. I only used the first page and think of like, well, what is really below all of this legal jargon? If I was going to retell the story of this person, which I blacked out their names as well, because I'm not trying to put people on blast here, what would I want to know about this person and about the legal system? It was a really fun exercise, and I think everyone should try doing it. Even if it's not a court document, I think it's just like a really interesting idea, and that's why I was so excited to read this. Obviously, it's on the back of his collection that this is like a highlight of it, other than the sonnet at the end. All of the poems are great. Even in the reviews, a lot of people mentioned the redacted poems, so that was pretty cool.
Yeah, Joey, I love that you brought us to this form. About a dozen years ago, I was working on a creative project with someone and I was like, let's do this. So we took stories out of books and out of the New Yorker and other magazines and started redacting a bunch of stuff and just watching, like the description said, a sculptor, a story emerged. We didn't exactly know what we thought we were going to tell in the story, but so much redaction created these really beautiful documents. So doing it with a legal text to me felt way challenging. I did not go down that path, but I am revisiting the fun I had doing that with a piece of literature to just cross things out. I think it'd also be interesting to use a newspaper article. And for me, Joey, it was a visceral experience using the Sharpie and crossing it out. I believe you did this
Yeah, I just did it.
electronically, but user tip, if you want to really have some fun, grab your copy of the New Yorker, rip out a random page, and just let the Sharpie just start marking things out. And I think you might really have a very interesting experience to see what your subconscious mind decided to do. We're leaving that in. We're taking that out. We're leaving this in. We're taking that out. It felt like a very playful, creative thing when I was able to do that. And Joy, I just want to say one more thing about redaction in the introduction and the author bio and the information about the collection. He's talking about a lot of systems in America that are blacking people out. They are erasing them. They are letting us know what can and cannot be, who gets erased, who gets highlighted. There's just so much that was reflected in this meta sense of his redaction poems following the actual process of redaction. So I just thought everything, it was on a very meta level. I was like, super clever.
Yeah. Before we move on from my example, Not that I'm like, "Oh my god, you guys, I'm a poet now." No, that's what I meant. Just curious because since we have both done this exercise and we both have some experience with it, even though I just have the one, I feel like that was the challenging part was because it was so limited. I could not add words or punctuation. I had to use what was already written into this document, and in your case, it was literature. Do you remember what it was that you were doing it for?
No, I think I still have a copy of it somewhere stuck in a journal. So I would be curious a dozen years back to look and see what it actually was. But to me, it was a much more playful thing that we were doing to explore creativity and just our wordiness. It was a person that I like to spend a lot of time talking about things. So when I looked at your document, and I think you said this was your first time of trying to do a redacted blackout poetry exercise, I thought it was a challenge. I was like, ooh, that's tough because exactly to your point, the language is so specific. And no, you don't get to just go and or because instead you don't get to add any of those words and none of those, I'm going to say fluffy words, connector words, free flowing poetry. You didn't get kaleidoscope. We're going to use indictment, plea agreement. And I think when the readers go to the collection that Betts made, you will see these beautiful words about making a plea. It's like, I'm pleading with you. I have pled and pled and pled to have the United States acknowledge that this was a problem. It's just so beautiful. But Joey, I didn't know if you were going to read a little bit of this,
You mean the one that I did or from Betts?
to read the one that you were doing, because I appreciate that we are not appropriating someone else's work. We always say, if you want to hear something beautiful, go get the source material and read it yourself. And I think it might gut you. That was my experience. It was gutting.
Yeah, I do think it would be interesting to read it really quick.
May I read it for you, Joey?
Yes, please do that.
In the United States District Court, Northern District of California, United States of America, case number, defendant, plea agreement 1. The indictment of this case charges the defendant with intent. U.S. 2, Section 18 U.S.C. Section 1703, delay and destruction and forfeiture. This document is limited and cannot bind any authorities. 2. The court is not an agreement. Sentencing is a matter. Take into consideration any circumstances concerning the defendant, including activities. Done.
Snaps for
Relief.
Joey. Okay,
Snap
snaps for
for
Joey.
Joey. I loved that. And I completely understand the challenges of not having a lot to choose from, but there was a lot you
Yeah.
blacked out. I'm going to say that's probably more than half of the page has been redacted.
Yeah, I redacted a lot. It's literally on Google. Anybody could just look it up. But I was like, let me not put all the information. But yeah, it was very limiting because, like you said, you can't just add other words. We can't just put this happened and because this or before, or we can't use anything really. So,
No likes, no
yeah,
similes, none
no
of the
metaphor
poetic
here.
stuff we like to throw out.
Yeah, and I had to read it like so many times in a row and then try and go back and be like, well, what is it that I want to say about this? So great job, Betts, because he tells very cohesive stories through his redaction poetry. Now, I'm not 100% sure if these are actual court documents that he used because some of the language is kind of strange. But I mean, I've never read any court documents, so how would I know?
Yeah, Julie, what I read about that, and I don't know the full context, they said that they did use in the production of the poetry book a text, a font that looked like court documents. So he was trying to be very specific about recreating the image of a court document. But I'm with you. I think some of the language that was used in there, it made my eyes roll to think that that was actually a legal lawyer wrote some of those words down, because those words, they were very defamatory words. They're words that people shouldn't be using in a court case, in my mind. So I thought that was
Well,
interesting.
yeah, I didn't necessarily think he took these actual documents from a case or whatever, or arbitration or wherever he could have gotten from. I don't think that takes away from anything. I think we understand what he was trying to do, even if he has to recreate it to fill it back in with what he wanted to say to create the correct narrative that he was trying to tell. I still think is super interesting. And it's obviously something that has stuck out because it's on the back of the collection. It is said in reviews. I think that was the first thing I learned about this collection was that there were redactive poems. So still great job.
Joey, can I just say something that just hit me visually when I looked at your image again? It's like prison bars. It's like a striped jumpsuit, literally,
I
because you
meant to
make
do
them
that.
so precisely done. It's like when I'm using my Sharpie and just kind of freehanding it, it's not as precise as that. But I'm like, Joey, that adds a whole new dimension to this whole redaction prison bar theme.
Yeah, that's a good point, is that there is sort of like this humanness to a Sharpie, because in the collection, obviously we did not show it because that's why I did this. It looks like someone took a Sharpie and redacted. So it does seem sort of like visually it's telling a different story. We're not artists. We're not sitting here critiquing art. But I do think now that you say that, there is something to be said about that. Like I used Photoshop. I just made a rectangle and I just made them whatever size and copied them. But it seems like there's more of a human connection and intent behind with a Sharpie and a physical piece of paper, which I'm assuming you did because you like to print stuff out, go through with a Sharpie and not just like a Sharpie brush, which I could have also have done on Photoshop. But good point. I didn't even think about it like that.
And your version on the screen as it is feels to me like a real government document because generally when I see redactions from the government, they are electronically done like this or they're very precise. It's not just some dude with a Sharpie like doing a little bit of scribble. It's very
Well, I
precise.
guess they used to have to do that
For
back in the
sure. That
day.
was what they did. Maybe a big fat Sharpie marker to do the whole line with a ruler. Like I could be the guy just doing the ruler on the
Yeah.
page.
And then you hold it up to the light and see if you see any of the letters
Sneaky Joey.
below it.
We're going to have to use photocopier for Joey because he's a little sneaky.
They got someone like that. Okay.
Would now be a good time for us to talk about the prison statistics and sort of what's going on in the United States now and before? Add some context.
To add some context and sort of ground us in these poems, I was curious as to what are the most current prison statistics because I've been reading more nonfiction lately, and I had recently started reading The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, and I finished recently Are Prisons Obsolete by Angela Y. Davis, who is obviously very famous. So, according to the United States Sentencing Commission, sounds official, as of March 2025, 93.3% of the prison population in the United States, obviously, is made up of men, and 34.9% of that population are Black. 30.7% are Spanish, 29.9% are white, and 4.5% is made up of other demographics that wouldn't fit into the other three. And according to Edberg, in 2024 is when those prison statistics would have mostly been calculated from. Only 12.36% of the entire population in the United States identifies as Black. So we can see that there is a huge disparity. Most people already are aware of this, but if you did not know that, now I'm filling you in. But I wanted to collect some data from reputable places to show the disparity in our U.S. criminal justice system.
For people who aren't numbers people, the population of the United States that identifies as Black is about 12%. So the fact that it's 3 times that number makes a person like myself, like you, ask a lot of questions about what caused such an overrepresentation of the Black population in our prison system. For people who can't keep the numbers in their head, I want them to look at the pie chart and say, oh, wow, 3 times as many Black men as population would say should be in prison are in prison. What exactly is up with that?
Because I've also have been reading and just researching just in general, but also inspired because of this collection and because generally the United States, enough said. In Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, which has been out for quite a while. I have the 10th anniversary edition, and I don't even remember when it was published. So I'm going to read from just a part from the intro, just because I think she puts it so succinctly, and I will never be able to summarize anything quite as well as this. So she says, What has changed since the collapse of Jim Crow has less to do with the basic structure of our society than with the language we use to justify it. In the era of colorblindness, it is no longer socially permissible to use race explicitly as a justification for discrimination, exclusion, and social contempt, so we don't. Rather than rely on race, we use our criminal justice system to label people of color criminals, in quotes, and then engage in all the practices we supposedly left behind. Today, it is perfectly legal to discriminate against African Americans. Once you are labeled a felon, the old forms of discrimination, employment discrimination, housing discrimination, denial of the right to vote, denial of educational opportunity, denial of food stamps and other public benefits, and exclusion from jury service are suddenly legal. As a criminal, you are afforded scarcely more rights and arguably less respect than a black man living in Alabama at the height of Jim Crow. We have not ended racial caste in America. We have merely redesigned it. So that sums it up.
Joey, that is so powerful just to sit with that for a minute. We talk a lot on this channel about Jim Crow laws, about Reconstruction, about the failures of the country to unify in a very equal way after the Civil War. It's just, it's a lot. And to think that you can be denied employment, housing, food stamps, the right to vote, the right to be on a jury of your peers. If you're a criminal, who better knows what goes on in a courtroom than a person who's had some of that experience? I'm not advocating that we do that. It's just interesting that we are able to strip away the basic rights of a person in society because they have a felony conviction. There's a lot of talk in the United States right now about what is constitutional and what is not constitutional. So I decided a great educational opportunity for me, because in the poetry collection, he specifically refers to the 8th Amendment and the 14th Amendment. I think you have something to say about the 13th Amendment. So the 8th Amendment is regarding cruel and unusual punishment. And the 14th Amendment, which is something that he mentions, is equal protection and other rights. They are talking about how we can all be seen equally in front of the law, regardless of race, gender, any of that. If you're an American citizen, you have certain due process that is available to all. The 13th Amendment, which kind of goes right in between in that spectrum, is about the abolition of slavery. So there's a lot that goes in there. And Joey, I went directly to the Constitution and looked it up online. So it's constitution.congress.gov. Look it up yourself. It is a federally funded and fact check interpretation of the Constitution. And I just want to read this snippet. The 8th Amendment prohibits certain types of punishment, excessive bail, excessive fines, and cruel and unusual punishments. As discussed in more detail in the following essays, which we will not be reading, these prohibitions were intended to protect persons convicted of crimes from government abuses of power. Viewed broadly, the 8th Amendment responded to these historically grounded concerns about disproportionate or cruel punishments by attempting to ensure that punishment is proportioned to both the offender and the offense. What is excessive is also determined by reference to modern standards. The Supreme Court has suggested proportionality may evolve over time. Out of the 8th Amendment's 3 clauses, the bar on cruel and unusual punishment has been most frequently interpreted by the Supreme Court, likely in part due to inherent ambiguities in determining what qualifies as cruel and unusual. So the Constitution is a living document. We amend it when we need to, but basically the founding fathers said we need to have the punishment fit the crime. We do not want to have cruel and unusual punishment. I was like, yes. And
Real
that is
quick,
all through there.
the U.S. Constitution is no longer on the White House website. And in fact, when you look it up, there's a little note at the top, because I went to go check today because I knew it had been taken down. It says that this is a document frozen in time. And so you just said this is a living document. So it's interesting that they literally put the opposite. They're saying this is a document frozen in time, saying it's an antiquated thing, blah, blah, blah. We should not be listening to the U.S. Constitution, even though it is literally how our government works.
So, Joey, you and I generally agree on all things in the spectrum. However, we often do find ourselves looking at the language a bit different. So if you say this is antiquated, I did find this from constitution.congress.gov today. This morning it was there. I do not know what's on the White House website, so I believe your intel to be correct. When they say it's a document frozen in time, yes, it is a historical document. It's not like we can get our Sharpie out and start redacting the stuff we don't like, right? That is not the process. But I'm greatly disturbed by what you said, Joey, because it happens to ring true. If you don't like the Constitution, just say it's old. We don't read this thing anymore. We have new rules. We don't like these rules. Pardon me? That is not what our country was founded on. So I am having a lot of personal anxiety about the willingness for large groups of people to ignore historical precedent, to push aside what we as a society have agreed upon in the past, as far as I know, that these are the laws and the rules that we're all following. So I was just really, really surprised about that. I'll quickly read something about the 14th Amendment. What is that about? And why do we have it? And that was a very important thing, Joey, that tied into what we were talking about, the Jim Crow laws. Why do we have the 14th Amendment? So this is a snippet from the website. The overview of the 14th Amendment, equal protection and rights of citizens. Amendment to the Constitution during the post-Civil War Reconstruction period resulted in a fundamental shift in the relationship between the federal government and the states. The Civil War had been fought over issues of states' rights, particularly the right to control the institution of slavery. In the wake of the war, the Congress submitted and the states ratified the 13th Amendment, making slavery illegal, the 14th Amendment, defining and granting broad rights of national citizenship. Welcome to the club, people. You are now in the United States as fully functioning citizens. And the 15th Amendment, forbidding racial discrimination in elections. The 14th Amendment was the most controversial and far-reaching of these three Reconstruction amendments. So, Joey, the reason I wanted to draw our attention to that, we talk about literature a lot. We don't necessarily say, let's look at the historical fact. And these are legal documents. I did not read every single legal filing that goes behind, but I was very happy that this poet is making broad statements about the current state of affairs by asking people to think about the intent and the words used in our founding documents. So, Joey, I'm just going to get off my soapbox here. I was deeply, deeply moved because the poem that I read that affected me the most was the one called In Houston. And they mentioned something happening 400 years ago, the setting of the bail bond system. That's a very antiquated system that predates our country, which our country is now 250 years old. What else happened 400 years ago? The first enslaved people came to the New World. They celebrated that within the last decade in Virginia as the 400th year of people coming to that area. So I'm just blown away again by the author's subtle and not so subtle nods to things we all should instinctively know and have in our education.
Yeah, I think he did a great job of making people curious, hopefully, about like if you weren't so aware of what he is speaking about, if you didn't know the total population of the United States by demographic, or you didn't know the prison inmate demographics, if you asked the question you asked earlier, why is that? And Michelle Alexander gives us the answer, which was that's the new Jim Crow laws. That's what happened.
Because we designed it that way.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's an excellent question. That asks us to think about this. Is this a system that is working as designed, or is it broken? And the answer is it's it's both. It's both broken, but it is doing what it was meant to do, which is to oppress people of color and primarily Black people, as we can see from the demographic statistics.
Why do you think he chose to express these very important points in a poetic way? And did that work? Did he reach his target from your perspective? Why poetry? We've learned a lot of facts. Do you think that Betts turning this into poetry was especially effective for reaching a broader audience?
Yeah, I do think that it makes a lot of sense that he would want to help educate people by using poetry because poetry is easy to read typically, even if you don't understand it necessarily. So another question that I had a biblical moment, I guess, because I had to ask myself while I was reading this redaction poetry, what is truth? And yes, this is from the Bible. Pontius Pilate asks that, who sentences Jesus to death. What is truth, and is this a subjective answer? Is it objective? Can we have objective truth within the judicial system in the United States? And I think with Betts' poetry, we can see that no, the answers are subjective. It depends on what you're looking at, the circumstances, and what details you are able to focus on. You mentioned this before, that there is a lot of legal jargon or legalese in court documents and in the Constitution, which is really a barrier for a lot of people, including myself, because I'm not a lawyer. I didn't go to law school. And so he really removes that barrier from his poetry to say, like, you don't need to understand all the sections and subsections and all of these hithertos and all this stuff.
Therefores,
Yeah, and whatever other legal jargon. So I really appreciate that this is such a simplified way to communicate that there is something below the surface of these legal documents. And I think it really lends itself to teaching people about media literacy as well, because if you do this with an article like you were talking about, you could change the story or you can erase the bullshit and the fluff from that article and find out what are they really trying to say. And then, of course, do your research and see, are these verifiable facts? Is this an opinion piece that is posing as trying to tell me this is statistical or something like that? And so, great job. Great job, Betts.
I think that his use of poetry was such a visceral choice. I think it was so effective. I sat down and reread these poems this morning, and I started to cry because they're so beautiful, but they are a gut punch. When you read literally between the lines, you are reading what he left there. You feel the helplessness of those who have been convicted of sometimes petty crimes. He did not indicate in the documents that they were violent offenders. Some people had traffic tickets. And basically, as we were talking about, does the system work like the system was designed? His whole point that I took away from this, Joey, and I think you probably did as well, that people get arrested for small crimes. They're told they can bond out. But one guy was an unhoused person. He didn't have family. And they're like, yes, we're going to set your bond at $600,000. And he was like, I can never in any lifetime get that. Well, I guess you're going to sit in jail. And then one of the other defendants that was in the court document in a different case said, okay, here's your fine. You can either pay the fine, don't have any money. I was shoplifting for a reason, probably. I don't have the money to pay this. It's like, okay, well, then you can sit in jail. It was like $2,500. Okay, you stay in jail, you lose your job, you're never going to be able to pay them back. There's just all of these ripple effects. And then they said, okay, well, we have another plan. Okay, that plan wasn't great. Here's the next plan. You can work for $25 a day in jail to work off your fine. And $25 a day to work off a $2,500 fine, that's a lot of days behind jail. That's did such a beautiful job. And I think this is why I started to sob, was this is just so unfair that people without means are caught up racially. I think there's just a big racial disparity of who gets accused of crimes and prosecuted for crimes. Then the economic side of it, they don't really have options to pay off their debt. So it's like indentured servitude. You're in the prison system and you can't pay your way out and you can't work because you're in prison. That was just such a sad thing to think about. All the people who are now stuck in a system that they will never be able to erase. And I think the fact that we started out this conversation by reading Betts' beautiful CV. He has done some amazing things. Yale Law School, accolades from Harvard and the Guggenheim and all these other places, but he still has the word felon next to his name. And he was 16 years old when he went into prison. He was convicted as an adult. Now, I do not know if he got that expunged, if he was able to get his voting rights back or can be on a jury or any of these things, but he's obviously a success story in the United States. This man has made an incredible life for himself, but he can't shake the stigma of being called a formerly incarcerated person or a felon. And I just think he just did such an amazing job of making the personal right in our face. If you don't care about people after reading these poems, I don't have a lot of faith in who you're going to end up being in the end.
Yeah, I don't know when this started, but you can in those rights back in New York State, you can vote again, even if you've been convicted of a felony. I'm not sure about the jury service part. I think so, probably. But a lot of states are taking care of that on the state level where they're saying, like, no, you should get your rights back. Because as Michelle Alexander explains in her book, this is all a way to control people, specifically Black people, after the actual Jim Crow laws were overturned. Obviously, this is after slavery and after Reconstruction here. So hopefully, all states, and hopefully it'll be a federal thing, who knows when that will ever happen, will acknowledge that felons who are supposed to be rehabilitated, and that's why they went to prison and have come out, they should be able to live a normal life and they should not constantly have that burden because it does make it really difficult to find employment. We read all these things, how hard it is to live life after you've done that. I could go off about all of these things, but I do want to bring up what you were saying about the actual poetry. In one of the poems, I'm pretty sure it's in Alabama, there is a story about a 58-year-old disabled person. We don't know what this person's disability is, but they are said to have gotten traffic tickets, was what you mentioned before, and that they had the option of either paying the bail and spending 3 days in jail, or if they could not afford to pay, which this person could not, they could spend 44 days in jail. If this person were to be able to earn $25 a day, as the other poem had suggested, then this person would only owe $1,100, which sounds like, oh my God, that's a lot of money. But is it worth 44 days in jail? Obviously, if you do not have that money, then that's not something that you're going to be able to afford. And just for more context, according to the U.S. Federal Reserve, they surveyed 12,000 Americans, I believe this is 2024, and found that a third of this group could not afford a $400 expense. You could blow this up and say, like, perhaps a third of all of Americans could not afford an $1,100 fee to get out of jail. So,
You can't make your bonds, you stay in jail.
yeah, and so there's just this economic hurdle that is purposely put in place to keep people imprisoned or in jail. So again, I think this poetry really inspires and encourages people to do the research. What is going on here? Why can't this person perhaps pay this amount of money? Why is someone being expected to sit in jail for a traffic ticket when I'm pretty sure one of them is a mother who has 3 children? That puts her children at risk. What if she doesn't have someone else to watch her children while she's in jail for however many days it's going to take her to pay off a traffic ticket? Surely there must be a better way to do that. And again, we have to go back to those questions like, is this system functioning as it was designed? Or is it broken? Or is it both? Is it broken and is working out the way it was supposed to?
Yeah, Joey, I really appreciate that you brought that to light of what are the unintended consequences.
Well, I do think that they're intended. I think this is the intent was for this to happen.
Sorry, Joey, let me rephrase that. Not the intentions of the people who made these laws and continue to uphold these laws and want to make sure that economic freedom often translates into freedom from jail, right? If you have the money, you get the lawyer, you get bonded out, you go on to live another day out of jail. If you don't have economic resources, you're stuck because there's nobody who can help you. What I meant by my previous comment about unintended consequences. Yes, a woman owed money for traffic fines. That's a bad deal. Yes, you should try to pay. But if it's between paying rent and paying her traffic ticket, she's probably going to pay rent to keep a roof over her kid's head. Well, now the mom is in jail. No one's making any money. Where do her kids go? Do they now go into a foster care system? Do we now make them wards of the state? Is that not significantly more expensive than letting that mom get on a payment plan or do something other than having to sit in jail and make $0 while the world just keeps eating away at all of her resources?
Again, I think the whole collection is great, but these redacted ones, even if they're not real court documents, really make you try to investigate, like, what could the circumstances be for this person? What are the laws that were broken? Or what are the circumstances in court? What are the fines? What are the punitive measures that the judicial system will take against people? But if you don't have the money, it doesn't matter because you're going to get locked up and your whole life could be ruined because you now have this arrest on your record. And so if you get a background check for a potential job, that could severely hinder you from getting gainful employment. Anyway, this is not a discussion about crime and why it happens. I just want to read something from Audre Lorde, who we're reading next week. It's a little excerpt from her essay, Poetry is Not a Luxury, because it's obviously poetry. And I think it really, again, so succinctly puts my feelings together here. She's writing this for women, but I think it applies to everyone. So for women, then poetry is not a luxury. It is a vital necessity of our existence. It forms the quality of the light within which we predicate our hopes and dreams towards survival and change, first made into language, then into idea, then into more tangible action. Poetry is a way we help give name to the nameless so it can be thought. The farthest external horizons of our hopes and fears are cobbled by our poems, carved from the rock experiences of our daily lives. Killed it, Audre Lorde, as per usual.
And Joey, I want to just give one more plug for poetry. Poetry is emotion distilled in the least amount of words. We had all of this background, politics, constitution, we're reading legal documents, we're doing all of this stuff. And Betts, on 4 pages, 5 pages, which are mostly redacted, tells the exact same story with the same moral, with the same ending, with significantly elevated power than we were able to evoke with this very brief language. And I love that you read Audre Lorde's essay, because we will be reading her next week. It's the reminder that poetry just is a distilled form of language. It's like music that goes beyond words. You don't always need words with music to know what it is. Poetry, you don't have to even understand every single word, but it triggers something in your psyche that you're like, oh, yes, I'm feeling all the feels. That's what they did in this teeny tiny 8-sentence stanza.
Saying that poetry is the distillation of however you said it very nicely and eloquently. That's exactly what he did. He took these really complex and nuanced conversations, put it in however many pages that are mostly redacted, as you said, and evoked the same thing, but he evoked emotion. It's not just bland statistics. I'm not trying to say we're bland, but we had to give full context in case someone didn't know all of these things, like what do the amendments say in the U.S. Constitution? What are the statistics for U.S. population, and compare that with prison populations? All this information, he is giving it to readers in such a beautiful way, and it's so succinct. But again, exactly what you said, everything that he was writing is what we fleshed out in long form, but he was able to do it in like the teeniest, tiniest amount of word count, which is a huge feat. And it is amazing to me when a poet can do that, because it's hard to do. I tried.
It is a skill. And I think he wants to call attention to the problem. He wants people to feel feelings around this and say, this feels really unfair. It's not happening to me, but it feels really, really not fair. The deck is stacked against a very large segment of the population. And I think he wanted us to get curious. When you throw out, oh, this reminds me of the Eighth Amendment, how many people out of 10, Joey, can you just say, hey, you know, the Eighth Amendment? I have maybe 1/2 people, because I know a lot of lawyers, who would be able to tell me what that is. But the average person is probably not going to do that. So he inspired me as an American citizen, born and raised here, who believes in law and order, those things. I do believe in it. I believe in the Constitution. It's like, okay, well, go read it. If you want to say that you believe in this, Jennifer, why don't you get some facts about what it actually says and not what you hope it says? Or somebody told somebody who told somebody a story that they want you to believe about what it's supposed to be. So A++ to Betts for inspiring us and hopefully others. Go read it. Go read the Constitution. Take a look. See if we are living out the values that are in this document today. That's it.
And in addition to reading the U.S. Constitution, it's probably kind of dry, but important to read. I did mention Are Prisons Obsolete by Angela Y. Davis. I just read that last week. Some of the information is outdated because it was written in 2003 and mentions the Bush administration, which it didn't make me giggle because it was fond memories. I was young in 2003 anyway, so it's not like I had that much of a connection to it. I do remember it, of course, but Everything else is extremely important to read. I read from The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. Another book that I had a quote ready, but I didn't get to read it, was from Black Women Taught Us by Jen M. Jackson, PhD. That's my recommended reading list, in addition to reading Felon, because I think these are all great books and collections.
Yes. So once you have all of your facts, you've read these amazing books, you've read the Constitution, you're going to need an amazing palate cleanser. And that is when you dive right into Betts, and you will not be sorry that you took the time to understand all the nuance behind these just really powerful, short, beautiful poems he put together for us based on his own experience and the experience of others that he's witnessed. Next week, we will be discussing a nonfiction essay, which is something we don't often do. So I'm really looking forward to that. We will be discussing a nonfiction essay by Audre Lorde called The Master's Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's House. Really looking forward to that, Joey. See you then.
See ya. Bye.
Bye.